Good afternoon and Assalamu alaikum to everybody. My name is Mahnur Ahmed. I'm the assistant coordinator here at Lincoln Corner Peshawar. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of our Creator Studio podcast. Today, our guest is somebody from the US Consulate General Peshawar. He has had 23 years of foreign service experience. He's been a diplomat for a very long time, almost as long as I've been born. So, this is going to be a very interesting chat with him. Mr. Panfilo Marquez, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here. It's a wonderful studio.
My pleasure. This is, I believe, your second or third time you're coming around here. I think you came around to inaugurate the studio as well in the start once.
I did. I think this is my second time. And it's great to see. It's great to see that the Lincoln Corner is getting tons of use as well as the studio.
Well, we're trying our best that, you guys put in such an effort to facilitate us in making this. So we want to, really give out good, high quality output in whatever we're doing. So I was reading your bio. Mm-hmm. And it turns out you've served in about 6 to 7 different countries. Mm-hmm. Brazil, Mexico, Afghanistan, mm-hmm. Costa Rica, Jamaica, and a few others. So how has that experience been like, in terms of just the cultural aspects? You've experienced all of these countries, you've been there physically. What similarities have you noticed in all these cultures, and especially now Pakistan? Can you draw up any similarities or differences?
I mean, that's hard. These are very different environments. And you have a place like Afghanistan, and particularly the province where I was serving in Paktika, which is extremely poor, very low levels of education, very low levels of internet penetration, or very low standards of healthcare for women in particular, but just in general. I think when I was there, the life expectancy for a typical Afghan woman was about 42 years. And so very different environments. But if I were to draw up any sort of threads that kind of tie some of these places together, I would say that in the more developed places or that I've served with more wealthier countries, there seems to be this spark that's kind of gone. I don't know how to explain this other than to say that
there's a bit of heart in the rest of these places.
There's this aspirational quality to mid-income countries like Mexico or Brazil, where people still haven't answered the question of, can I feed my family every day, mm-hmm. or can I buy a house and live safely? That mm-hmm. question is still an open question, and so they are constantly trying to find ways to be innovative, and they're mm-hmm. constantly trying to find ways to be entrepreneurial. And I'm not saying it's a desirable set of circumstances because they're trying to be entrepreneurial and creative because they have need.
Yeah.
But achieving some of those or overcoming some of those challenges somehow brings them a great deal of joy that isn't always visible in the more developed economies mm-hmm. where people have those answers. Those questions are answered. Yeah. If you go to a place like France, where I also served twice, France is beautiful. Food's incredible. People are wonderful. I have some great friends from that I've maintained for over 20 years. But no one there is really looking for a side gig. No one's looking to be an Uber driver. Mm-hmm. Not among the people that have been there for generations. Yeah. You really have to look to the immigrant communities in those countries mm-hmm. to find people that are like, okay, I got to open up a taco truck, or I got to figure out some way to.
So they're always hustling,
Yes, always hustling. And so I think and I don't know how to answer that. I don't know how to answer the question for the more developed countries. But what I can say about countries that are still, like I said, middle income or developing countries, is that it's always enjoyable to watch how people solve problems. For me, that's I don't know why. Maybe I'm secretly an engineer, or I'm secretly an inventor, and I don't even know it. But I love when people get creative about solving the problems in front of them. Yeah, because you can see the
different layers of creativity that people bring to problem solving. Not every other person is going to have the same answer to the same question. So it's always good. This is why diversity is so important. You have one problem, and if you have one person solve it, you're going to get an answer for it. But it's going to be very one-dimensional, as opposed to, let's say, if you make a group of 5 or 6 people, everybody's going to have their own input. You're going to make a solution. You're going to come up with a solution that's multifaceted, maybe more in-depth as well, and more comprehensive as well. And this is why, I think diversity in policy, diversity in parliaments, diversity in all these places is very important, because it adds a different layer to a different dynamic to the issues that you have.
One of my favorite stories about diversity, because I have a hard time thinking about diversity strictly in terms of race or even gender. I mean, those are aspects of diversity. Yeah. But to me, one of my favorite stories involves a woman who was she was an oncologist and studied cancer, particularly breast cancer in women. And she was struggling for years with this problem of finding tumors in specific types of tissue that was more dense than others. So most of the machinery and equipment that had been developed to find breast tumors really dealt with one type of tumor and one type of tissue. And for for denser tissue that they didn't have the right equipment. And she was having dinner one time with her husband and some friends, and she just casually mentioned this. And one of the friends was an astrophysicist, and he said, "Oh, well, when there are nebulas that are out in space that are a little bit too dense, we use this mechanism to try to find planets and stars within those nebulas." And it turns out that was actually applicable to the problem that she had about finding tumors in this 15-20% of women for whom the typical scan didn't work. So that's for me, bringing people from different backgrounds to try to look at the same question is really exciting, because you get really interesting things.
Yeah, because I feel like this is where we might have gone wrong, is that we've strictly categorized every subject separate from each other. I mean, specialization is good, but if you can't have a multidisciplinary approach to what you're studying and what you're doing, I think you will lack a lot of depth to what you're doing. Like the example that you gave, he was from a different background, but they were using the same mechanisms, and it could be applied over here as well. So this is why it's always good to see different kinds of people coming together to solve a problem.